Today we have a 2004 Chevy Impala with a 3.8 3800 Series 2 naturally aspirated engine. That means it's not supercharged. We're having an overheating issue today with our car, and our problem is from this water outlet right here, right next to the belt tensioner under the intake manifold. Actually, it's connected to the lower intake manifold and the alternator bracket housing. This outlet basically sends water into the heater core so you can have heat in the car. Since they're plastic and this car has 150,000 miles, the plastic will deteriorate and it will leak, not like metal, which will stay there the rest of your life. But another thing also depends is how you keep the cooling system. You must make sure you maintain a healthy cooling system or a clean cooling system. We're going to replace the thermostat today, and I'm going to show you how to fix those plastic outlets. Most people will remove this clamp. I don't recommend that you do, because it's very tricky, and if the pliers slip off this clamp, it could snap at your fingers. So I highly recommend that you just go straight at the thermostat housing right here. There's a 10mm, two 10mm bolt. One has a stud on it to clip. You see this plastic right here that holds the little coolant temperature harness. That clips right into there, so it holds it away from this exhaust right here. You see this crossover pipe? It's very important that you place that little clamp onto that stud. If you don't place this clamp on the stud, the wire, due to vibration when you're driving, will move and touch that exhaust manifold, and it will burn, and then you will have issues with the car driving, and you're going to get stuck in the road. Okay, so before we remove this bracket to change that outlet, we have to take off this 10mm nut right here. It's a bolt actually, and up here you have a 15mm. You will also need to disconnect the battery, the positive, and make sure there's no power going through the car. You have two 10mm up here on the water reservoir for the coolant. You will remove that. Down here is another stud which will have a 10mm, or sometimes it just has a button that just holds the water reservoir in to the strut tower. So once you get that out of the way, you're going to have to remove, there's 3 bolts you're going to remove from the bracket. Down here is your power steering reservoir. Today we have a 2004 Chevy Impala with a worn out water pump that's right here. It's got a bad seal, so we have to replace the water pump with this one. This is how the water pump will actually look when it's on the engine block. And you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 bolts holding it in place. 4 of these bolts are 1/2-inch bolts like this. Now it's important when you replace this 4 bolt right here that you wire brush the thread and you apply this sealant compound on it. This is called a Teflon sealer. It's from Permatex. It's a white paste which you apply on the thread, and then you will install your water pump. The rest of the bolts are 10mm. You really don't need to put a thread sealer on them because they don't go into the engine block like these. These bolts extend all the way through the engine block into the water jacket. So it's very important that you put a sealer on this thread, because when the engine gets hot, you're more likely to get a leak. That's why you need a thread sealer. This is our water pump. Removing the water pump is not that difficult. It's something that should take maybe a ½ hour to an hour. But this bolt right here is going to be an issue for you. In order to remove this bolt, which is on the back here, all the way by the power steering pulley, you're going to need to remove the power steering pulley or the power steering pump. Now it's easier to remove the pump because the pump has 2 1/2-inch bolts which you can get access through the pulley because you see there are holes in the pulley, you could just slide your 1/2-inch socket in and release the 2 bolts. One bolt is located at a 1 o'clock position and the other bolt is at a 7 o'clock position. So you will turn your pulley to line it up with the bolt to take the nut out from the power steering pump. Then you will lay the pump back. Then you will get access to this bolt behind the water pump. Once you have all the bolts off, then you can remove your water pump. Now another thing, before you take the belt off by releasing this tensioner, you should release the 4 8mm bolt that's on the water pump pulley with using this 8mm socket and ratchet. Just release the bolt and then you could take the pulley off and the belt with a 15mm wrench. You place it on the tensioner pulley like this and you press back and you'll be able to take the belt off. Then you will be able to take off the pulley off the water pump. Now if you choose to remove the pulley from the power steering pump, which has to be removed to get access to this bolt, you will have to use this tool. This is the tool right here to remove the pulley from the power steering pump. It's 2 half shafts that goes over like that, and that will go on the pulley to get removed. But I don't recommend that you remove the pulley because it's very time consuming. It's a lot of work. You're better off just releasing the 2 1/2mm bolt and lay the pulley back. Another thing, when you take the battery out, you'll have to take out this retainer right here, remove your battery cable, disconnect your fuse box harness. Now, this is our thermostat. This is our thermostat housing. This is our old thermostat. This is our new thermostat. It comes with a rubber ring, which is a gasket or a seal. That's for here. This will get placed right in here, like that. Then you will take your housing, place it on top, and you have 2 10mm screws. This one with the stud goes on the outside, and this regular one right here goes on the inside. And you will take care of that with a 10mm socket. Now the problem for overheating is because of this bracket here that sits on the side of the engine. You'll notice it because you see how the alternator is. Now anyway, to unbolt this bracket you're going to need a 15mm socket. These are the bolts, 3 bolts like this. One goes here, one goes here, and another one goes behind. Now before we were having this overheating problem, we replaced these plastic water outlets, and these water outlets send water to the heater core so you can get heat inside of the car. This is the inlet, which comes from the water pump right here. This is also plastic. This is going to need replacing. This car has 150,000 miles on it, as you can see. This is our magnet, right? See that? Picks up the pliers, right? No dice. See? So this is all plastic, and at 150 miles the plastic will deteriorate, so you will need to replace it, or the coolant will leak out of the engine. And here you can see this little clean spot right here on top of the water pump. Well, the coolant was coming out from here on the lower intake manifold and leaking down here. Once the engine goes low on coolant, it's going to overheat. You're going to have all kind of problems. Another thing is, this is our power steering. This is where you will fill your power steering from. A lot of people, you will not notice the power steering reservoir when looking at the engine because it's hidden due to the configuration of the alternator. So you have to go from the back and get access to the power steering. It's something you should do when the engine is cool. And on the power steering cap, this is our power steering cap right here. That's the symbol. You will see they have the line for where it should be. And it's just a simple twist, a 90-degree twist, and it's on. Alright? So today the problem was we had an overheating issue, and the issue was caused by these plastic water outlet which got dry rotted and just basically caused the leak. So we were going to replace this, and you can see 1, 2, 3 bolts needs to get replaced from the cylinder head. One is here, the top one is here, and the second one is here. Also, this bottle, you're going to need to remove this bottle. You have two 10mm here. You're going to take that out, and on the bottom of the bottle you might have another 10mm or a button just holding it against the firewall. So you can lift this up and place it in front. See the button down here? That's where a 10mm will go to hold the plastic in, and then you have two up here. So. Also, when you're going to drain the coolant drain is on the driver's side of the radiator. You can get it from up here, but you're going to need an 18mm socket with a ratchet, and you're just going to twist it off. This is what it looks like. See? And the 18mm socket will go on, and you'll screw it out to drain all the coolant out. Another thing, never work on any engine when it's hot or warm. Make sure the engine is completely cool. Best time is in the morning after the car has been sitting for all night, and then you could perform any cooling system or any kind of engine work. I'm going to show you how to remove the belt, and you're going to do this by removing the water reservoir. Like I showed you in the video before, you have two 10mm up here, and you just slide this out of the way and put it to the side. Let's see if I can get the camera sitting for you. You're going to take your 15mm socket with ratchet, you're going to place it on the bolt in the center of the tensioner pulley, and you're going to push down. When you push down, you see how slack the belt gets? And then you use your other hand and you will take the belt off the alternator. Apparently. So now we have our repair completed. We have placed our coolant in. This is Dexacool. And we also have to bleed the coolant system. So you're going to have to open this little bleeder right here with an 8mm socket, and then just turn it open a little and get all the air bubble out of the engine. You see that? All that foam? That's the air bubble. And you're going to let that happen until you have water coming out of there. But you're going to have to keep adding water here. So you're going to need a thermostat so your fan is on. So you're going to place a funnel in there. You're going to add water or antifreeze. You see now, you see how the water is spitting out, trying to get all the air pockets out of the cooling system. Now the engine is still cool. Remember, we start the engine up from cold, so it's not. You should get all that air bubble out of there, and water starts flowing out. Then you can shut it down. I mean, just shut the bleeder down. Then you place your radiator cap on. Let the system run. If your car has a temperature gauge, you'll keep an eye on the temperature gauge. It should not go above the centerpiece right there. That's about 220 degrees, 210. So once it gets up to that temperature, we're going to shut it down and let it cool off. Now when it cool off, you're going to come back over here to the bleeder when it's cool, when the engine is cool, and you're going to open the bleeder again, and then you're going to come here and open the radiator cap, and you're going to add coolant if it's necessary. You're going to start the car up again, go through the same procedure, make sure all the air bubble comes out from, like you saw before. Then you will shut this down, place your cap on, and that's it. That's how you bleed the cooling system. And the customer is complaining about there is no hot air coming out of the vents when he put the temperature control on hot. Another thing is, when he's driving the car, the coolant temperature needle, this needle right here, always stays in the cold section. So we're going to take a look at what's going on today, and we're going to address this issue, and 100% we're going to fix it, because we build cars. So we know about cars. So let's start it up and see what happened. As you can see, we have a service engine soon light. That means that the ECM, engine control module, or PCM, powertrain control module, detects a problem with the engine performance. Now, like I explained before, the customer is not getting any heat from the vents, and the coolant temperature always stays in the cold section while driving. Most people would think it's a bad thermostat, but we're going to take a look and see what's going on. First of all, let's see what temperature the car is at. Right here we have our gauge info. So right now we have 156 degrees Fahrenheit. Normally, this car is supposed to get up to 220 degrees Fahrenheit. That's when that needle right here will be in the middle of the cluster. At 220 degrees, the ECM will command the cooling fan to come on, to turn on. So now let's see what's going on under the hood. Let's see what's causing this needle, the temperature of the car, to not get up to operation temperature. Another thing, if the temperature of the car does not reach operation temperature, you will burn excess fuel, because the ECM is recording a faulty coolant temperature sensor, which will give a faulty fuel injection measurement. So you will be running a little rich, and then you will feel a little loss in power. You could foul up the spark plug, you could damage the oxygen sensor. So let's take a look under the hood and see what's going on. This is our coolant fan relay right here. This is our primary, this is our secondary. Normally, when the driver is driving, the coolant fan will come on and continuously stay on all the time. The reason for that is because we have a bad coolant temperature sensor, which is located right in this area here. So I'm going to shut the engine off, and I'm going to change that coolant temperature sensor. As you can see, it looks like a used unit, like something that came from a junkyard. You see the paint on it? So we're going to change that sensor, and then we should have good coolant temperature. So we're going to remove the coolant temperature sensor. When you remove the coolant temperature sensor, you're going to get a little coolant come out. What I advise is, do not put any sealer on the thread, because this sensor ground to the engine block. And if you put a sealer between the thread and the sensor, you're going to have a little faulty ground between the block and the sensor. Now we have our sensor replaced. I'm going to put a plug back in. Make sure you match the plug up according to the sensor. If you put the plug in wrong, you're going to bend the pin inside the sensor, and then you will have the same problem. Okay, so now we finished changing our sensor, and it's important that you place back this heat shield, because this is the exhaust cross pipe right here, and this generates heat, so it doesn't affect the sensor. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start the car up, and we're going to look at our temperature reading. So now you see we have 171 degrees Fahrenheit. Before we removed the sensor, it was 154 degrees, and now all of a sudden it goes up to 171 degrees, which automatically tells you right away that the coolant temperature sensor is faulty. Because how can one sensor read 154 degrees and then 1 minute later another sensor read 171 degrees? That's like almost 20 degrees difference, which is a big deal. So I'm going to race up the engine so we could get it up to temperature. This light will automatically go off once the computer records that the problem has been gone, which means the key has to be cycled on and off a few times. But you can also disconnect the negative cable on the battery for 10 minutes and the check engine light will go away. See, our temperature is climbing, which means we know the sensor is working correctly. But we just want to make sure that the fan comes on at 220 degrees. So once the temperature reaches 220 degrees, we will step out of the car and identify that the fan is turned on to bring the temperature of the engine back down to 200 degrees. Okay, so we have our temperature up to 210 degrees. And our fan is running. Once the temperature drops, the fan will shut off. Now, another thing I want to go over with you on this car, sometimes you're going to experience drivability issue without a check engine light. Sometimes you're going to be driving and the car will shut off, you will get sluggish acceleration, and the car will act very funny. Sometimes it wouldn't even maintain idle. What I recommend you do, if the car acts erratically or stall while driving and it does not display a check engine light, it is highly recommended that you clean the throttle blade inside the throttle body with a throttle body cleaner, because sometimes a lot of carbon gets built up around the throttle plate, and this affects air for idle performance. Even though you have an idle air control sensor, the throttle blade is essential. You must make sure it's clean. Also, do not remove the screen that you will see in front of the throttle body, because that screen straightens out the airflow, which means it prevents turbulence once the air is entering the engine. So this sensor here to get an accurate reading of the incoming air. Remember, the screen inside the throttle body is not to be removed, because it will give turbulent airflow, and this sensor will cause a check engine light relating to a mass airflow sensor. So that's our frequently asked questions for today. So our temperature is 207. Now we're going to go for a drive and make sure we have heat.